Good morning, friends. Pastor Sara here with our sermon time. We are in week 3 as we continue our journey through Lent, practicing prayer together, which means then our Sunday morning time, we're trying to set up really the opportunity to practice prayer, to make time and space for that. And the idea is that we are all encouraged to take these practices that we explore on Sundays and take them into our week with us, to try them out, to see which ones, if we were to stick with them, could be those practices that help, as the video said, rewire us, that reveal for us that diamond essence, help us remember who we are, that presence of God that is our essence. So this past Sunday, the past week, we focused on the practice of exercise. Did you make time to practice exercise or engage your body in some way to listen for God in the physicality that you hold, especially with all the sunshine that we had? I sure hope that you did. I know I did. It's a practice that I wonder if this could be a practice of prayer that you continue with as a way to connect with God. Also, if you were here last Sunday, then you were here to experience that setup for exercise and that experience that we had led by Karen Ullery of praying in and with our bodies. That was such a beautiful time together, yes, about how even through the simple practices of breath and how our posture is, through the complete emptying and filling of our breath, so much happens in us to connect us to the love of God that is right here with us, in us, if we just stop to literally breathe it in. I loved taking Karen's notes and practicing with them this past week. Mine got a little beat up. So I hope that you had a chance to do that too. If you missed that, the video is all posted on Facebook, and the PDF of her handout is there. We also have copies this morning. If you didn't get it, please grab it. Just a really great way to breathe and pray that she led us through. And so for today, let's get to today's and this week's practice. So let's do that by turning first to our scripture reading for this morning. Are you ready? Let's do it. So we're going to turn to a familiar story that's in John chapter 4. So one of the 4 biographies, the 4 Gospels, the 4 biographies of Jesus. We're turning to John. And this is where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at the well. So I just want to set up the context and the arc of the story before we hear it so that we're ready for that. So Jesus and his disciples are on their way through the region of Samaria. And I heard a joke recently, and I just laugh every time I say Samaria because it sounds like you're saying, yeah, Jesus was going through some area. I don't know which one, it was some area. Anyway, so Jesus was in Samaria. Jesus finds himself alone at Jacob's well, which is still there today. And he's there at the hottest time of the day. In the middle of the day, he stays there while the disciples go to get some food in town, and along comes a woman, a Samaritan woman. So 3 things that we should know about this situation that Jesus is in that are scandalous, okay? So the first scandalous thing is that good, pious Jewish men, which Jesus is, they do not spend time alone with women. Second, Jews don't talk to or have anything to do with Samaritans. They'd especially not share a drinking vessel with them, and yet Jesus asks this Samaritan woman for a drink. So 2 things. And then the third, this woman is obviously some type of trouble, or at least a little shady of a character here by current standards, because this well is where women would go to draw water. That's a normal thing, but what's not normal is that would be done at noon, because this is the desert. When the sun is hottest, that's not when you would go. Usually water was drawn at dawn or late in the evening. When someone would come to the well, if they would do that during the middle of the day, they're obviously trying to avoid being seen by others. So at first read, it sounds like a nice conversation between Jesus and this woman, but there is, as always, so much more going on. And I wanted us to just kind of have that awareness as we head into this. In this scene, Jesus is breaking all the rules again. So their conversation, it starts with water, and we're going to read that part of it, and then we're going to stop. If we were to keep reading, it's a much longer story. Jesus reveals that he knows this woman has been married 5 times. He knows that the current man that she's with, she's not married to him either, and this eventually leads to her seeing Jesus as the Messiah. She goes to spread the word. Folks come back, and they see this for themselves. It's a pretty great story. But we're just going to hear that first portion of the larger story, the part about the water. And as we do, I invite us to listen to this, picture it with the painting. It's just called Woman at the Well. It's by a contemporary Utah-based painter, J. Kirk Richards. So imagine this scene, enter into the scene, feel the heat of that desert noontime as Dave comes up to read for us. This is John chapter 4, verses 5 through 15, the Message version.
Jesus came into Sychar, a Samaritan village that bordered the field Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was still there. Jesus, worn out by the trip, sat down at the well. It was noon. A woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" His disciples had gone to the village to buy food for lunch. The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jews in those days wouldn't be caught dead talking to Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh, living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. So how are you going to get this living water? Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well and drank from it, he and his sons and livestock, and passed it down to us?" Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks this water I give will never thirst, not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty, won't ever have to come back to this well again."
So their conversation continues, but we stop here for today. I just want you to notice with me one little phrase. Did you hear how Jesus offers the Samaritan woman living water? Living water, it sounds like a very Jesus-y kind of phrase, but it's actually just a regular phrase that people in Jesus' world, that they used for what we would call running water. Water that is moving in some way, either in a stream or a river, rather than water that's still in a pool or a well or even a puddle. It's water that's more likely to be fresh and clean than water that has been standing around. So that's living water, it's moving. But of course, we know that Jesus isn't just talking about fresh water. He's using the phrase to convey deeper meaning, right? Which he conveys a few moments later. He explains that. But this is a common phenomenon in John's gospel in particular, where Jesus says something to someone, and like this woman, they're a bit just lost. And with the Samaritan woman here, when Jesus says he has living water to offer her, she says, What are you talking about? You don't even have a bucket. How can you do that? So she misses the deeper meaning. This is a conversation between Jesus and a Samaritan woman. This is a conversation about water. But it's also not about water. Jesus is using water to describe the kind of boundless, life-giving life that is available. He describes it as an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life. I love that. And the thing is, for us, why this matters is not only because we can hear Jesus, speaking these words to us too, that there is this endless, fresh water to drink deeply that he offers us. We can hear that. There is that, but also it's that we have interactions like this with God all the time. It's about our stuff, the regular stuff of our lives, and through our stuff, we're invited into something deeper because it's not just about our stuff. Through our physical stuff, just how we relate to the stuff that we're touching and engaging with all the time, like water and bread and coffee and our phones and our car and our homes and our clothes, it's about our stuff, and it's also not about our stuff. But it begins with our stuff, like with water at Jacob's well. God can meet us in our connection and relationship with our stuff. You tracking? And there's so much we can say about that, about our relationship with our stuff, but today, where we go with this, we examine how God meets us when that stuff, our stuff, is absent. There's something that happens when we choose to be without the water and we find ourselves thirsty. Or choosing to be without food and we're hungry when we're not consuming the thing. In that space that is made in us when we're without the stuff, something happens in the space we allow, in that silence, in that hunger, in that thirst. There is something for us to find in the ceasing. In the language of spiritual practice, the ceasing is what we call, of course, fasting. And in our Lenten journey here at Salt House of Practicing Prayer, it is our prayer practice for today and for the week to come. Have you ever fasted? Have you ever fasted from food? Can you raise your hand? I can't actually see you, but can you just raise your hand? Have you fasted from food before? Is that something you've done? Have you fasted from other things with intention? Fasting is most often described, and I think we think of it as the practice of skipping meals, of not eating, of not having food, but it can be other forms of fasting too. And when we do it, there is something that happens in the ceasing. What happens when the stuff is absent? It's about the stuff, but it's also not about the stuff. I've been in a season of many forms of fasting just in my own life, ceasing to do many things in my recovery from post-concussion syndrome, which I'm hitting the 6-month mark of that in these next weeks. So to be clear, I am not the kind of person who ceases very easily or naturally or chooses that, but I have been ceasing in many ways for me to have just limits on my brain, what my brain can take in each day. So I've ceased. I have been fasting from playing soccer and from running and from going to the store. Do you know that the grocery store is actually the #1 most stimulating, everyday experience that we have? Like when I was doing occupational therapy, they're like, okay, we're going to work on the strategies to get you through the experience of the grocery store. It's a thing, which I just thought was really interesting. And it is. There's a lot. So no going to the grocery store for me. Not going to my kids' sports events. No grabbing coffee at Starbucks. Not having people over to hang out. Hardly going to other people's homes either. Not preaching live here on Sundays, right, regularly, hence the video, so that I can still preach and yet also be present, and my brain doesn't have to do all the things with all the input and all the stimuli on a Sunday morning. And especially at the beginning, there was so much that I did not do at all. But I keep getting better, and most things I'm reintegrating, at least in small doses. I can do a lot more now than I could in October and even since January. So I can continue to be on that pace of getting better. But through it all, it's funny what you miss once you stop doing those things or having those things, right? And it's fascinating what you notice about yourself, your habits, your hungers, your stuff, when you cease from it. Like for me, I think the most obvious fast that I've been on is fasting from screens. When my brain injury first happened, I couldn't look at screens at all. I could, but it would be, I couldn't focus on it. It gave me nausea, eye strain, so I didn't. Which, by the way, it just makes me wonder about screens in general, even when our brains are feeling well. What is it doing to our brains? Just something I wonder about now. But now I can be on screens for spurts of time, even for a few hours a day, which is good for sermon writing, for work. But initially, no phone, no computer, no TV. Have you ever intentionally taken breaks from your phone, from screens? If you have, then you know that you begin to notice how much you usually have it, right? So you notice the pangs of wanting to check something, your messages, various forms of social media, even just the weather or the traffic or your Fitbit or other things that are tracking the stuff that you're doing. And holy cow, this was my experience. I now recognize my own hunger, right? My thirst that's there for all the things my phone and technology make me feel and experience. And there is so much research out there, right? That we know how our brains get these doses of dopamine and we can't get enough because it just keeps making us feel so good as we read those posts and those messages. And I knew that was happening, but I also didn't know that was happening. Because it's about my phone and my relationship with technology. But it's also not about my phone and my relationship with technology. Because here's the thing about fasting. Fasting helps us say the necessary no to the stuff that we are overly bound to, the stuff that we think is feeding us in the ways we hunger and thirst. A necessary no that makes us more available to say yes to that which actually feeds our hungers and thirsts, to that artesian spring that Jesus speaks of. If we say yes to that, we won't thirst again. Last week with Karen Ullery, we practiced a way of breathing where we exhale all the way and we hold that emptiness for as long as we can, and something happens in the emptiness. Do you remember that? You can do it again where you exhale and blow it all out, and then she just had us go, 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 go. Then when we can actually inhale, we can become full and filled with that breath that we need after first being that empty. And we can be connected to knowing our need for it too. So last week we connected with that rhythm of saying no with our breath in order to say yes with our bodies, in our bodies. How our breath and how exercise makes space in us for encountering God in our bodies as incarnated people. And today and this week to come is about practicing the no, the ceasing, the emptying with our stuff in order to have that space in us to say yes, yes to stuff with an intention that allows us to breathe in that which actually feeds us and fills us. So we wanted to be able to practice this. Yes, that's what we're doing this Lent. So it's hard to practice fasting here right now in the hour that we have together. But we wanted to at least try something that opened us up into this kind of practice and posture. It's not quite the same, but it's saying no to open us up differently to an experience. And it's simply to close our eyes when we would usually have them open, to cut out that visual input as we sing a song together, without the words to read on the screen, without the visual cues from the band about what we're doing or what's next. In ceasing to take in that visual input, how does the experience of singing change for us? So we opted to not pass out blindfolds because we talked about that, just because we knew just the cost of it, but also potential waste. So I trust that you can choose to not peek while we do this, so you can refrain from that. But I invite you just to close your eyes now. And as we take a few moments just to cease from seeing, and we enter into this experience of singing together.
Then so deep in you. Keep me abiding, keep me abiding, keep me abiding, that I might bear fruit.
Because it's about seeing, but it's also not about seeing. Friends, you can keep your eyes closed for now if you'd like, but I wonder, how was that experience? What did you do? Did you try to learn the song and sing along? Did you choose to listen? What was different for you? What space was made in you? What did you feel or think of? This is not quite the same thing, but it's in the same spirit of fasting. And we're going to keep holding this energy and use it as a springboard to each consider what practice of fasting we can choose for the week to come. So to frame our commitment that we're going to make together, I want us to just listen for a moment from our book that we're reading together this Lent, Prayer, 40 Days of Practice. So here's Justin's guidance for us for the practice of fasting. And he talks about two approaches. So here's the first. He says, this week, choose something you regularly consume and give it up. For instance, consider skipping a meal or beverage and then doing two things with that sacrifice. First, use the time you'd normally spend preparing and consuming that favorite thing to reflect on your blessings and pray for those who lack the same. Second, keep track of the money you'd otherwise have spent on that favorite thing, and at the end of your fast, commit that money to providing for folks living without basic needs. So that's one way to do it, food or beverages, great way to go, highly recommend it, especially if you've never done that before. But then Justin shares another approach too. If skipping food or beverages doesn't work for you, maybe you watch television at night or listen to music or a podcast on the way to work, consider turning that off this week and using that time to reflect on and pray for the relationships you've been given. Consider keeping a journal of your reflections and prayers. You just might be surprised to see whose faces and names come to mind when you give your heart room. So my friends, today we invite each other into this practice of fasting. So the question you and only you can answer right now is, what can it look like for you to fast this week? Whether food or drink or something else, I think the key to answering the question of fasting this week is to pay attention to what we consume. To consume means, by definition, to eat, drink, ingest, buy, use. We are consumers in so many ways. Yes, with food and beverages, and we take into our body so many other things. Music, sports that we play or that we watch, what we read, what we watch, what we scroll through, what we buy, what we acquire. What do you love to consume? And maybe for you, like me, it's what you consume on your phone, your technology. And it's not a bad thing to use our phones, but it is something that maybe for you, it's something to experiment with fasting. Even as a little micro experiment, we asked you at the beginning of worship to turn off your phone completely, not just on vibrate or silent. And I wonder, have you looked at it all, or have you thought about your phone? How many times since we did that? Maybe fasting from tech every evening is something you could do, or just for a 24-hour break. And again, we practice this week, holding it as something to potentially become a regular prayer practice in our lives, because prayer practices shape us for our whole lives. And through fasting, it is in these places of consumption that we can make room. We can say the necessary no in order to be able to say the needed yes. Justin, in our reading for today, he shares a fabulous reflection about rolls of toilet paper. So do read that. But what he says, do read it, get the full story. But what he says about it kind of breaks the whole thing open when he says, skipping meals, or fasting in all of its forms, may seem only loosely associated with the practical daily occurrences of life. But I have found that voluntarily and regularly removing a comfort from my life readies my heart to make more urgent, everyday sacrifices when they are called for. Prayer and fasting can seem divorced from normal life, but the posture I learn to live in, particularly as I voluntarily give up my own comforts, prepare me to give myself away when the time comes to do so. And that's it, right? The posture of voluntarily giving up our own comfort prepares us for, builds the muscle memory for giving ourselves away when the time comes to do so. Fasting is a practice that gets us ready. Ready for what? Ready to love. We say here at Salt House that we want to be a school for love, and today we commit to practicing fasting for the sake of how it connects us to that diamond essence, that essence of God in us, that place of love. So what is a comfort you could give up for a while this week? Well, you have a small piece of red paper. If you don't, just get that hand up in the air and we'll get one to you now. And you probably recognize it, yes, as a stop sign. So these are for each of us to write down, to name that commitment to fasting for the week. What can you make a full stop of? There are plenty of online resources on how to fast, even how to do a technology fast. So, snoop around and find out what you need to get some help if you need that. But think of what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it, and keep it simple and keep it small. Then write it down on here, a word or phrase that kind of names that for you. Your commitment of saying no in order to say yes. And then take your stop sign home with you. Use it as a bookmark in your prayer book or put it on your bathroom mirror in another place to be that reminder, a reminder to cease. Because fasting is about food, but it's also not about food. Fasting is about logging off social media, but it's also not about logging off social media. In our discomfort, Jesus invites us into something deeper. That life of God, that diamond essence in us and in all things. So as we close, we usually sing now after the sermon, making room to listen for God, to pray and to sing, but the band is going to come back up. But as another practice of fasting, we'll use these next few minutes for silence, for fasting from song, essentially, because to be silent can be really hard and uncomfortable for many of us, and a great way to begin the practice of fasting together. So let's do that and let's pray. God, thank you that, like the woman who courageously engaged with Jesus at Jacob's well, that you meet us in the everyday stuff of our lives. In these moments now we name that we are people who love to be comfortable, and yet we also long to be people who rise up to love others when it matters most, even when it inconveniences us. And so this week we choose a posture of saying no in order to be ready to say yes. We choose fasting as a way to practice the way of love that demands something of us. And we begin that posture now in the gift and discomfort of silence.